The scent hit me first, a delicate mix of jasmine and something else I couldn't quite place. Not my perfume. Not anything I owned. It clung to Mason's dress shirt like an accusation, faint but unmistakable as I stood in our laundry room. Frozen with the fabric pressed against my face. I'm Trinity, and until this moment, I thought I knew exactly who I was, a devoted wife living what I believed was a charmed life with my husband of 8 years. But that unfamiliar fragrance changed everything. Hey, what's taking so long with my shirts? Mason called from upstairs. His voice carried that slight edge of impatience I'd grown accustomed to lately. Just sorting colors, I answered, proud of how steady my voice remained. I dropped the shirt into the washer like it had burned me, then added extra detergent. Part of me wanted to obliterate that scent, while another part wanted to preserve it as evidence. I need the blue one for tomorrow's meeting, he said, footsteps approaching. I quickly closed the washer lid and turned to face him. Mason filled the doorway, all 6 feet of him radiating the confidence that had first drawn me to him. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit when he was working late on his laptop. Which seemed to happen more and more these days. The blue one's still at the cleaners, I lied, watching his face carefully. I'll pick it up first thing tomorrow. He frowned, checking his phone. You should have told me earlier. I needed that shirt. Sorry, I said, the word tasting bitter. I've been distracted lately. Clearly. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, Jessica called. She's having some financial troubles and needs a place to stay for a while. My stomach clenched. His sister had always treated our home like her personal hotel, coming and going as she pleased. For how long? However long she needs, Mason replied, his tone leaving no room for discussion. She's family. Family. The word echoed in my head as he walked away. I waited until his footsteps faded before pulling out my phone and opening the banking app. Our joint account showed several recent restaurant charges at places I'd never been to, all during those late nights he claimed to be working. The washer hummed behind me, washing away evidence I should have photographed. But I knew that perfume would haunt me, a ghost of something I couldn't yet prove but felt in my bones to be true. I scrolled through our photos from last month's anniversary dinner. Mason's smile looked genuine as he raised his glass to 8 years together. Had he been lying even then? The Mason in that photo seemed like a stranger now, wearing a mask I'd somehow never noticed before. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, "Can't wait to catch up, sis. See you tomorrow." Face blowing a kiss. I stared at those cheerful emojis, remembering how she'd always sided with Mason during our rare arguments. How she'd laugh off my concerns about his late nights. "You're so paranoid, Trinity," she'd say. "Mason works hard for you both." The washer clicked into its spin cycle, and I made a decision. I opened my browser and typed, "How to track a cheating spouse." Then I deleted it and wrote instead, "Best private investigators in the area." Upstairs, Mason's voice drifted down as he took another call, speaking too softly for me to make out the words. But I didn't need to hear them. That perfume had already told me everything I needed to know. The question now wasn't whether my husband was faithful, it was what I planned to do about it. I saved 3 investigator numbers in my phone under innocuous names: yoga studio, book club, and dentist. Tomorrow, I'd start making calls. But tonight, I had to prepare for Jessica's arrival and pretend everything was normal. I was getting good at pretending lately. Maybe too good. The washer beeped its cycle complete. I transferred the clothes to the dryer, handling that blue shirt last. The perfume was gone now, but its memory lingered like a promise of things to come. Jessica arrived like a hurricane, 3 designer suitcases trailing behind her as she swept through our front door. Mason carried them upstairs while she collapsed onto our couch, her perfectly manicured hand draped across her forehead. "You wouldn't believe the nightmare I've been through," she sighed. "My landlord is such a monster. Who evicts someone just because they're a few months behind on rent?" I busied myself in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter. "How many months exactly?" Oh, who keeps track of these things? Jessica waved dismissively. Mason said I could stay as long as I need. You don't mind, right, Trinity? The knife clicked against the cutting board as I chopped vegetables for dinner. Each slice felt deliberate, therapeutic. Of course not. Your family. Mason returned, immediately gravitating toward his sister. I put you in the guest room overlooking the garden. Best view in the house. You're the best brother ever, Jessica cooed. Then, eyeing my cooking preparations, oh, are we eating in? I was hoping we could try that new bistro downtown. The one you mentioned, Mason? My knife paused mid-chop. Which bistro is that? Just some place near the office, Mason answered quickly. Nothing special. Jessica's eyes widened slightly before she covered with a laugh. Well, anywhere's better than cooking at home. No offense, Trinity. None taken. I scraped the vegetables into the trash. Let me change. Upstairs, I called the first investigator on my list, speaking in hushed tones. How soon can you start surveillance? We can begin tomorrow, the woman replied. But it's not cheap. I glanced at my personal savings account, the one Mason didn't know about. That won't be a problem. At the bistro, I watched Mason and Jessica share private jokes and meaningful glances. They'd always been close, but something felt different now. When the waiter arrived, Mason ordered without consulting me. The usual for me, he said, then added, and my wife will have the salmon. Actually, I interrupted, I'll have the steak. Rare. Jessica's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose. Since when do you eat red meat? People change. I met her gaze steadily. Sometimes they're not who we think they are at all. Mason's phone buzzed. He checked it under the table, his expression shifting subtly before he excused himself. Work emergency. Won't be long. As soon as he was out of earshot, Jessica leaned forward. What's going on with you lately? Mason says you've been acting strange. Does he? I took a slow sip of wine. And what else does Mason tell you? He's worried about you. We both are. Her concern would have seemed genuine if I hadn't noticed her eyes darting toward the direction Mason had gone. You seem different. Different how? Suspicious. Defensive. She reached across the table to pat my hand. I resisted the urge to pull away. Mason works so hard for you. You should be grateful. Grateful, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Through the restaurant's window, I caught a glimpse of Mason outside, his phone pressed to his ear, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. Yes, grateful. Do you know how many women would kill to have a husband like him? I watched as Mason paced, running his fingers through his hair, his tell when he was excited about something. Or someone. I'm starting to wonder if they already do. Jessica's face hardened for a moment before smoothing back into concerned sister-in-law mode. What's that supposed to mean? Before I could respond, Mason returned, tucking his phone away. Sorry about that. Where were we? Just girl talk, Jessica chirped, but her eyes held a warning when they met mine. I smiled and raised my glass. To family, I said. And all their little secrets. Mason's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Jessica's laugh came a beat too late. And in that moment, watching them both squirm, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but now it had company, a cold, calculating clarity about what needed to be done. The investigator would start tomorrow. But tonight, I had a front-row seat to their performance, and I intended to study every act. The investigator's photos arrived in my encrypted email at 3 a.m. My hands trembled as I scrolled through them on my phone, each image a knife twisting deeper. Mason and a woman, tall, elegant, confident, sharing intimate moments outside an upscale apartment building. His hand on her lower back. Their faces close, laughing. A kiss that looked anything but casual. I zoomed in on her face. She was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, not because of her looks, but because of how happy Mason looked beside her. I hadn't seen that expression on his face in years. "Can't sleep?" Jessica's voice made me jump. She stood in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in an expensive silk robe. I locked my phone. "Just checking work emails." "At 3 in the morning?" She opened the fridge, the light casting harsh shadows across her face. "Mason mentioned you've been acting strange lately." "Distant." "Did he?" I kept my voice neutral. "When was this?" "Earlier today, while you were at the gym." Jessica poured herself water, studying me over the rim of her glass. "He's worried about you." The lie settled between us like poison. I'd never left for the gym. I'd been following Mason to his other life, watching him play house with the woman I now knew was named Avery Thompson. According to the investigator's report. "How thoughtful of him to notice," I said. Jessica set down her glass with deliberate care. "He notices more than you think." "I'm sure he does." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Especially at that bistro downtown." Her expression flickered. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." I headed for the stairs, then paused. "Jessica? How long have you known about Avery?" The glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. In the silence that followed, her face told me everything I needed to know. "Trinity, I don't." My voice came out steady, surprising us both. "Just clean up your mess. You're good at covering things up, aren't you?" The next morning, I waited until Mason left for work before following him again. This time, I watched him enter a coffee shop where Avery waited. Through the window, I saw him slide into the booth beside her, not across from her. Intimate. Familiar. My phone buzzed, a text from Jessica, "We need to talk." I ignored it, watching as Mason pulled out a small jewelry box. Avery's face lit up as she opened it, and even from across the street, I could see the diamond catch the light. My own wedding ring felt like it was burning my finger. Another text, "Please, Trinity. It's not what you think." I switched off my phone and walked into the coffee shop. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully as I approached their table. Mason's back was to me, but I saw the exact moment Avery noticed me, her smile faltering, her eyes widening in recognition. "Hello, Mason," I said. He froze, then turned slowly. The color drained from his face as he looked between Avery and me. "Trinity? What are you doing here?" I smiled at Avery, who was staring at my wedding ring. "I thought it was time I met the woman my husband's been having dinner with at that bistro downtown. The one Jessica's been helping him cover up." "Mason?" Avery's voice shook. "What is she talking about?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Avery, I can explain." "Explain what?" I cut in. "How you've been living two lives. Or how your sister's been helping you juggle them?" The jewelry box sat open between them, the diamond ring inside catching the light just like my wedding ring had 8 years ago. The symmetry would have been poetic if it wasn't so painful. "Trinity, please," Mason started, but I was already turning away. "Enjoy your coffee," I said. "And Avery? That ring?" He gave me the same one. Down to the cut and setting. "He's not just a cheater, he's an unoriginal one." I walked out, leaving chaos in my wake. Through the window, I saw Avery stand up, tears streaming down her face. Mason reached for her, but she jerked away, grabbing her purse and rushing past me outside. My phone had 7 missed calls from Jessica. I turned it back on and texted her one word, "Checkmate." My parents' house looked exactly as it had when I left 8 years ago, right down to the crooked welcome mat I now stood on. Finger hovering over the doorbell. Before I could press it, Mom opened the door. "I saw you from the window 10 minutes ago," she said, pulling me into a hug. "How long were you planning to stand there?" The familiar scent of her lavender perfume broke something inside me. My shoulders shook as she held me tighter, not asking questions, just waiting. Dad appeared in the hallway, his reading glasses perched on his head. "Who's at the Trinity?" His expression shifted from surprise to concern. "What did he do?" I followed them into the kitchen, where Mom's half-finished crossword puzzle sat next to a cooling cup of tea. Such normal things. My life had stopped feeling normal the moment I found that perfume on Mason's shirt. "You should see your face when we mention him," Dad said quietly. "Like you're bracing for impact." I placed the manila envelope from the investigator on their kitchen table. Mom reached for it, but I caught her hand. "Are you sure you want to see?" She squared her shoulders. "If you're strong enough to live it, we're strong enough to know it." The photos spilled across their floral tablecloth, Mason and Avery's documented affair laid bare. Mom's hand flew to her mouth when she saw the jewelry box picture. Dad's face darkened with each image. "Jessica knew," I said. "She's been covering for him. Living in our house, watching me search for answers she had all along." "That little," Dad started, but Mom touched his arm. "What do you need from us, sweetheart?" The question caught me off guard. Everyone else had told me what to do, how to feel. Mason with his gaslighting, Jessica with her dismissive concern, even the investigator with her professional advice about gathering evidence. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to burn everything down. Show everyone what he really is. But another part wants to protect him still," Mom finished. "Because that's who you are. A protector. I don't want to be that person anymore." Dad gathered the photos, stacking them precisely. "Then don't be. But choose who you become next carefully. Revenge might feel good now, but it burns both ways." My phone buzzed, Avery's number. The investigator had included it in her report, but I hadn't expected her to contact me. The text read, "Can we meet? There's more you need to know." "She's reaching out," I showed them the message. "Mason's other. I don't even know what to call her. Victim? Accomplice? Fellow survivor," Mom suggested. "Maybe you both need answers. Or maybe it's a trap," Dad countered. "Mason finding another way to manipulate you." I stared at the message until the screen went dark. What if it's both? What if everything's both now, truth and lies, justice and revenge? Mom reached across the table, her wedding ring catching the light, 40 years of faithful marriage glinting against my 8 years of lies. "Then you choose your truth. Your justice. Not what Mason deserves, but what you need to heal." My phone buzzed again. "Jessica, Mason's telling everyone you're having a mental breakdown. Please come home before you do something you'll regret." The threat was clear, wrapped in concern like all their manipulations. But sitting in my parents' kitchen, surrounded by genuine love and support, the message lost its power to wound. I typed back, "You're right. I am coming home. And I'm bringing the truth with me." To Avery, I wrote, "Tomorrow. 2 p.m. You pick the place. Are you sure about this?" Dad asked, watching me gather the photos. "No," I admitted. "But I'm sure about one thing, I'm done being the only one carrying these secrets." Mom hugged me again at the door, slipping something into my pocket. Later, in my car, I found her old house key on a new keychain. The message was clear, I had a safe place to land when everything exploded. And things were about to explode. Mason and Jessica had written this story for years. Now it was my turn, and I was choosing a different ending. Avery chose a small cafe across town, far from Mason's usual haunts. I arrived early, watching her through the window as she settled into a corner booth. She looked different now, less polished, more real. The engagement ring was gone. "I brought something you should see," she said as I sat down, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, property records, and what looked like business contracts. Mason isn't just lying about his relationships. My coffee arrived, but I couldn't take my eyes off the documents. Numbers jumped out at me, large transfers, hidden accounts, properties I'd never heard of. how did you get these? I'm a financial analyst. When things didn't add up, I started digging. Avery's hands trembled slightly as she pointed to specific transactions. He's been moving money around, creating shell companies. Your signature is on some of these documents. No, it's not. Then I saw it. My signature, perfect in every detail, on papers I'd never seen. He forged these? With Jessica's help. She's not just his sister, she's his business partner. The cafe's warmth suddenly felt stifling. Every memory of Jessica's financial troubles took on a new, darker meaning. They're using my identity for fraud. Among other things. Avery glanced around before lowering her voice. There's more. I found evidence they've done this before, with other women. It's their pattern. My phone buzzed, Mason asking where I was. I ignored it. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm their next target. The engagement, the joint venture proposals, it's all part of their scheme. She pulled out one final document. And because yesterday, I found this. It was a life insurance policy in my name, recently updated. The beneficiary had been changed to Mason, and the coverage amount had tripled. They're planning something, Avery said. Something big. And soon. I stood up abruptly, needing air. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too normal, for the darkness spreading through my thoughts. Avery followed. Trinity, wait. We need to. To what? Go to the police? Tell them my husband and his sister are running some elaborate con? That they might be, I couldn't finish the sentence. We have evidence now. Real evidence. Another text from Mason, Jessica says you took some files from my office. We need to talk. I showed Avery the message. They know. Then we don't have much time. She handed me a business card. My brother's a lawyer specializing in financial fraud. He can help, but we need to move fast. I thought of my packed suitcase hidden in my parents' garage, the emergency cash, the escape plan I'd been crafting. It wasn't enough anymore. This wasn't just about infidelity or betrayal, it was about survival. I have to go home, I said. Get something from the house before they realize what we know. That's exactly what they want. Trinity, it's not safe. Nothing's safe anymore. I started walking to my car. But I'm done being their victim. At least let me help. I can. No. I turned back to her. Stay away from the house. If I'm not in touch by tonight, give everything to your brother. Everything. The drive home felt surreal. 8 years of marriage dissolving into a criminal conspiracy. Every loving gesture, every family moment with Jessica, had any of it been real? Mason's car was in the driveway when I arrived. Jessica's too. They were waiting for me, probably with another perfectly crafted lie, another manipulation. But I had something they didn't know about, the truth. I touched my mother's key in my pocket, thinking of her words about choosing my own justice. Then I checked that the recording app on my phone was running and walked into my house for what I knew would be the last time. There you are, Mason called from the living room. We've been worried sick. I closed the door behind me, hearing the click like a gunshot. Have you? How thoughtful of you both. It was time to see who would break first. Mason and Jessica sat in our living room like royalty holding court. The same room where we'd celebrated holidays, shared dreams, built what I thought was a family. Now it felt like a trap closing in. You've been acting erratic, Mason said, his voice carrying that concerned tone he used when manipulating clients. We're worried about your mental state. I placed Avery's folder on the coffee table between us. Worried I'd find these? Jessica's perfectly manicured nails dug into the armrest. Mason didn't move, but something flickered behind his eyes. Where did you get those? He asked softly. Does it matter? What matters is what they show. I pulled out the life insurance policy. Planning for my unfortunate accident, Mason? He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Honey, you're not well. Those documents are standard business practices. Jessica can explain. Like she explained her financial troubles? I turned to his sister. How many other women have you helped him destroy? Jessica stood abruptly. You ungrateful bitch. Everything we did was for this family. Family? I laughed, the sound harsh even to my ears. Is that what you call your little criminal enterprise? Mason moved then, quick as a snake, snatching the folder. You've been talking to Avery. She's smarter than you gave her credit for. We both are. He leafed through the documents, his mask slipping with each page. These are copies. The originals are safe. Along with everything else I've gathered. Jessica's phone buzzed. She checked it, her face paling. Mason, we have a problem. The Thompson account. Shut up, he snapped, then softened his voice. Trinity, sweetheart, you're confused. Let's talk about this rationally. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. Or what? His tone changed completely, ice replacing concern. You'll run to the police? Tell them your crazy conspiracy theories? Who do you think they'll believe, the respected businessman or his unstable wife? They'll believe the evidence. What evidence? Jessica held up my phone, she must have grabbed it when I was focused on Mason. This recording? Oops. She dropped it into her water glass. I watched my safety net short-circuit and die. You should have stayed ignorant, Mason said, almost sadly. It would have been easier. For who? For everyone. He pulled out his own phone. Now we have to do this the hard way. The front door opened. 2 men in uniforms entered, private security, not police. I recognized their company logo from one of Mason's shell corporations. Mrs. Walker has been experiencing severe paranoid delusions, Mason told them, his voice professional and concerned. She needs specialized care. No. I backed away, but Jessica blocked my path to the stairs. You can't do this. We already have, she smirked. The papers are all signed, by you, remember? My forged signature. On medical papers I'd never seen. Giving him power over my freedom. The facility is very discreet, Mason said as the men approached. You'll get all the help you need. I looked at the husband I'd loved, the sister-in-law I'd trusted, seeing strangers wearing familiar faces. Everything had been a lie, right from the start. You won't get away with this, I said, but my voice shook. Mason smiled, that same charming smile that had won me 8 years ago. I already have. Multiple times. The security men reached for my arms. I fought, but they were too strong. Through my struggles, I saw Jessica picking up the scattered documents, erasing the evidence of their crimes. It's for the best, Mason said as they dragged me toward the door. In time, you'll understand. My last sight was Jessica's triumphant smirk as she dropped the folders into the fireplace. Everything I'd gathered, burning away like my future. But they didn't know about Avery's copies. Or the email I'd scheduled to send to her brother if I didn't check in by midnight. As they forced me into their waiting car, I held on to that thought like a lifeline. They'd won this battle. But the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The private facility's white walls closed in around me as I waited in the consultation room, my hands folded in my lap like a good, docile patient. 3 days of playing along, swallowing sugar pills, nodding at patronizing doctors who believed Mason's lies. The door opened. Mason entered, immaculate in his business suit, followed by Jessica. Their confidence faltered when they saw Avery sitting beside me. What is she doing here? Jessica demanded. Visiting hours are for family only, Mason said smoothly, reaching for the call button. Don't bother, Avery said. The staff are rather busy dealing with federal agents right now. The color drained from Mason's face. Jessica grabbed her brother's arm. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice trembled. I stood, steady on my feet despite the sedatives they'd tried forcing on me. The FBI doesn't bluff about wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted murder. Murder? Mason laughed, but his eyes darted to the door. "You're delusional. That's why you're here." "That's why you put me here," I corrected. "But I wasn't the first, was I?" "Tell me, what happened to Catherine Porter?" He flinched at the name. Jessica's perfectly manicured nails dug into his arm. "She had an accident," Jessica said quickly. "Everyone knows that." Like I was supposed to have an accident? I pulled out my phone, my real phone, not the one they'd destroyed. "The FBI has been very interested in the pattern. Young women, married to Mason, diagnosed as unstable, then tragic accidents following massive insurance payouts." Mason's mask cracked. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, she can." Avery stepped forward, her own phone recording. "Your sister talks in her sleep, Mason. Has for years. Remember those sleepovers when we were roommates, Jessica? I recorded everything." Jessica's face contorted. "You bitch." She lunged at Avery, but I stepped between them. "It's over. The FBI has everything, the forged documents, the offshore accounts, Jessica's confessions. Even Catherine's real autopsy report." "You're lying," Mason whispered, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Am I?" I moved closer, seeing fear replace confidence in his eyes. "Check your phone. The Thompson account isn't the only one frozen. Everything's gone, Mason. Everything." His phone buzzed. He checked it, hands shaking. Jessica peered over his shoulder, her face crumpling. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." "Yes," Avery said. "Your empire's falling, and we made sure everyone knows why. Your investors, your clients, your other potential victims, they all received very detailed emails an hour ago." Mason's composure shattered. He grabbed my throat, slamming me against the wall. "You destroyed everything." "Mason, don't." Jessica screamed, but Avery was already moving, her taser connecting with his side. He crumpled, twitching. The door burst open. FBI agents poured in, weapons drawn. Jessica tried to run, but didn't make it 2 steps. As they read Mason his rights, he stared at me with pure hatred. "You'll never prove it," he spat. "You're just a crazy woman. My unstable wife." I knelt beside him, speaking softly so only he could hear. "That's where you're wrong. I'm not your wife anymore. The divorce papers were filed last week. You're not my problem, you're the FBI's problem now." "And mine," Avery added, showing her badge. "Did Mason ever mention I worked white-collar crimes before becoming a financial analyst?" "No?" Guess he wasn't the only one living a double life. Jessica screamed obscenities as they led her away. Mason remained silent, his perfect facade finally shattered. Before they took him, he looked back at me one last time. "I loved you once," he said. "No," I replied. "You loved what you could take from me. There's a difference." The agents led them both away, leaving me with Avery in the suddenly quiet room. "You okay?" she asked. I touched my throat where Mason's fingers had left marks, feeling nothing but relief. "I will be." "What happens now?" "Now?" She smiled. "Now we make sure they never hurt anyone else again." I walked out of the facility into bright sunlight, leaving behind the remnants of Mason's carefully constructed lies. The truth had finally set me free. The courthouse steps felt colder than I remembered from the preliminary hearings. Mason and Jessica's sentencing had drawn a crowd, former clients, journalists, and other victims who'd come forward after the story broke. Catherine Porter's mother clutched my hand as we waited. "I never thought we'd see justice," she whispered. "For 8 years, I knew he killed her." I squeezed her hand back, remembering the perfume on Mason's shirt that started everything. Such a small detail that unraveled such an elaborate web of lies. The doors opened. Reporters surged forward as Mason and Jessica emerged in handcuffs. Their designer clothes were gone, replaced by prison orange that made Jessica's face look sallow. Mason's eyes found mine in the crowd, but his manipulative charm had vanished. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. 25 years, Avery said beside me, her FBI badge catching the morning light. No possibility of parole. Jessica stumbled on the steps. No one moved to help her. The sister-in-law who'd once commanded every room with entitled confidence now couldn't meet anyone's gaze. Trinity. Mason called out as they led him toward the prison transport. It didn't have to end this way. I didn't respond. He'd lost the power to compel my attention, my reactions, my anything. Instead, I turned to Catherine's mother. Would you like to get coffee? I think we have stories to share. Later, in a quiet cafe, I sorted through the last of Mason's papers. Our house had sold quickly once the scandal broke. Most of the money went to his victims' families, which felt right. I kept only what I'd brought into the marriage and the evidence of his crimes. You never told me, Avery said, sliding into the booth. How did you know I was FBI? I didn't. I smiled, remembering her perfect timing at the facility. I just knew you weren't what Mason thought you were. None of us were. Speaking of unexpected things. She pulled out a folder, similar to the one that had started all this. We found more accounts. Offshore holdings, shell companies. He was worse than we thought. No, I closed the folder without looking. He was exactly what I thought he was, in the end. A lie trying to look like love. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother asking about dinner. The key she'd given me still hung on my keychain, but I hadn't needed it. I'd found my own way home. The media wants interviews, Avery mentioned. Your story could help other women recognize the signs. Maybe someday. I stood, gathering my things. But right now, I want to focus on recognizing myself again. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across the courthouse steps where justice had finally been served. Catherine's mother had cried when Mason was sentenced, but I hadn't. My tears had dried up somewhere between finding that perfume and discovering the truth about his other victims. Trinity? Avery called as I reached my car. There's something else. Another case, similar pattern. We could use your insight. I paused, key in the ignition. Part of me wanted to drive away, leave all this behind. But another part remembered how alone I'd felt before finding Catherine's story, before connecting the dots that led to other victims. Send me the files, I said. But not today. Today I'm having dinner with my parents. She nodded, understanding. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of the prison transport in my rearview mirror, carrying Mason and Jessica to their new life. I didn't watch it disappear. My phone buzzed again, a group text from the victims' support network we'd formed. Women sharing stories, warnings, triumph. Some seeking revenge, others justice, all finding strength in breaking their silence. I turned toward my parents' house, where dinner and normal conversation waited. The weight of Mason's betrayal had lifted, replaced by something unexpected, not just survival or revenge or even justice. But a quiet certainty that I could trust myself again. Sometimes that's the best revenge of all.